So very nice to see you, Shannon. Thank you.
And you too, Dean.
Yeah, thank you. Morning, everybody. Yeah, it's quite exciting to be here, really presenting you the final draft or the final version of the growth strategy. So you'll know that we went to public consultation into February, and really good sessions that we had. There were 4 in total. I attended 3, and sort of across everybody we got to all of them. A few pitchforks. I think we had some fun in Pahiatua, where I think Amy and I nearly sort of wanted to hit the eject button and run out pretty quickly. But actually, you know, Councillor Gilmore, thank you. You managed to handle them pretty well. And actually, you know, their concerns were valid. So they were talking about industrial zoning that was going to be put across their land, and they were pretty against it. Obviously, we had the fun and games from down the road here with a few placards and things. But again, once we started talking to them and understanding their concerns, everybody seemed pretty happy. So, and then lots of really good feedback. You know, lots of people who said, "Oh, this is really great for the council to be looking at this and thinking about this so long term." So, so that's really quite good. And in the end, we didn't actually get a lot of written submissions. I think maybe 12 or something like that that came through. Maybe a bit more, but actually, I don't think it mattered because we'd had such good engagement with people directly. We knew what people were wanting. The written submissions largely came from the bigger companies. We had one from Transpower, we had one from Fonterra, you know, those sorts of things. So our Horizons, yeah, was a pretty detailed submission. So what we did, Fiona and the team put together a massive spreadsheet. I don't know if you've seen it, but it basically captured everything that was said from as many people as we could think of. And I did a similar thing. We sort of took hers and expanded it out. And then I think this document's been shared with you all. So I don't think we necessarily need to go through all of the details, but what this captures is essentially all of the changes we've made to the document and why we've made them. So probably the thing to do is just to pick out a couple of key ones, unless there are any that as I scroll through, if somebody wants to talk about, then we can do that. The first one there, page 12, starts to talk about design guidelines. This didn't necessarily come from the consultation directly, but was more a conversation that Amy, Dan, and myself had following. The recommendations were to create a set of design guidelines that would sit alongside the district plan that would help guide people in terms of future development. So whether it's residential development, industrial, whatever, what's a good outcome to be had from design. We decided that actually that a number of councils had used that over the year. Auckland is a classic one. They've got the Auckland Design Manual, which is really comprehensive. Other councils have used them. But actually, there's starting to be a trend away from having design guidelines as a sort of separate document, because they can be problematic in a way that they're guidelines. And so anybody can say, well, yeah, I followed your guidelines, but I interpreted them this way. And there isn't really any policy or substance that says, well, we have to do this, we have to do that. So we've sort of made the decision that actually it would be better if we took that concept but embedded it into the district planner's policy. So you have to do these things in order to follow a certain consenting route, and if you don't do those, you have to go through a different consenting route. So that's the difference between perhaps a permitted or controlled activity and then into a discretionary or restricted discretionary activity. So we've changed every reference in the document from design guidelines to design policy. So we're still going to move forward with the piece of work, and it will still sit as a separate document. We'll come back to you in coming months with that sort of separate document. But what we'll do is we'll have a whole lot of recommendations for policy to be embedded in the plan, rather than it being a document that sits to the side. So it's essentially the same, just the wording and the way it'll sit will be a little bit different. there were quite a few conversations from the community about rates. People obviously concerned that if their section, which is currently rural, gets turned into residential, will they pay more rates? The simple answer to that is yes, it will. We had got prepared a document that explained exactly what the changes would be. And it does depend on whether that person actually connects to the council network and then what their activity is. But, you know, we were pretty honest with people and said, yeah, look, there is a likelihood that your rates will increase. But on the flip side, you now have a piece of land that you can subdivide into a residential development. And I think when people started to see the big picture, they were like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm going to have some cost in the short term, but in the long term, perhaps a better outcome. So we just made a point in there in the document about that. Obviously, there was a lot of work put in last year covering all of the legislation, which of course the government has now completely changed. So we've rewritten all of that section to align with where we know legislation and policy is right now. It's still a work in progress. We're never going to get it right because the government's still changing and everything. So it's really a mark in the sand. As of now, this is what we know. This is the policies that we know from the national government that they're going. So at least that sort of sets that up. Lots of little changes just requested by Horizons or Transpower. Transpower just wanted it to be known that they were there, which is fair enough. We hadn't ignored them, but we hadn't made a big deal of it. And largely we hadn't because none of the sites that we were looking to rezone was really anywhere close to anything of theirs, apart from the one in Woodville. So that was what flagged their main concern. And all they wanted to do was just be sure that they were in there. They've got policies, etc., already in the district plan and in their national policy statement that talks about development next to lines. So it wasn't a big deal. We then started to talk about mixed use, and this came up a lot through the discussions. And as we talked about it as a team afterwards, again, it's a trend that's happening quite a lot around the country. It's the idea that the concept of having just a commercial site or just an industrial site is starting to change, that people want the ability to maybe have an office on the ground floor or maybe a shop on the ground floor, an office on the first floor and a residence on the third floor if we go 3 stories. Those sorts of ideas where actually it's a little bit more flexible about what you can do. For smaller towns in the country, like the ones that we have in this district, we felt that actually it's a really good idea. It's a really good way of being able to promote some growth and some activity within the towns by not necessarily restricting people to certain things, that it gives them that flexibility to perhaps have a shop and a residence or something like that. I mean, I don't think we're going to see a massive influx suddenly of residential apartments in the town centre, but it gives that flexibility for that to be able to happen. There is some concern that maybe that means that we could have light industrial right through the centre of town. Well, possibly. There's 2 ways that we can get around that. Well, one of them is just market forces. You're not likely to put an industrial unit in the centre of Dannevirke next to a pedestrian crossing where nobody can stop and get in and that sort of thing. So there's a practical reality in terms of that. But also what I was just talking about, the design policy. We can put some stuff into the district plan and we'll think about that. Maybe it's an overlay within certain areas that say, look, this is mixed use zone, but actually what we're targeting here is shops and residences and no industrial or just shops. And then we can have a bit more flexibility out of it. So what we're really saying is let's have a mixed use zone, but then have some additional controls that we add into the district plan that say exactly what that means and how they can be operated. When we started looking at it, we thought, we'll just do a little bit of mixed use. We had already introduced it in Norsewood and in Eketahuna, and we said, well, let's do a little bit in Woodville. Well, actually, no, let's do all of it in Woodville. Let's do all of it. So we've actually taken out all commercial and all of the existing commercial, and we've changed all of it across every single town to mixed use. So that's quite a big change. But feedback we had during the discussions with people were really interested in that concept. We spoke to a couple of people in Woodville who were particularly interested and said, oh, that gives us a lot of flexibility. That's going to be really a great help. And I think it's useful, given that it's earthquake prone buildings, that gives some options for how those buildings might now be rethought. Does anyone want to chat about that now? We're pretty comfortable.
Councillor Keary.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I looked at it myself, Shannon, and I thought that was a really good move because, they're bringing forward the earthquake prone buildings review, or the government are going to look at that again. And if they get rid of the, if they take applying the earthquake prone building standards to the residential uses, which has been quite strongly pushed in the cities where they've got into apartments and that, it could make a big difference even in little areas. So I think I think that's a likely change actually myself. I really do think that's one that the minister will probably adapt, and that just makes that does make it a lot easier for small towns, especially if we've got the residential ability to. A lot of these buildings in our towns have probably only got a residential use other than pushing them over really. So I'm 100% behind this, actually, the adoption of mixed use right through the commercial sector. I think I agree with you entirely. If we're concerned about industrial, we can then adopt some other standards, and lay it underneath that just to direct them. So very good change.
Councillor Scott.
Thanks very much, Chair Sharon, and thanks guys for all of the work that's gone into this. Just going to make an observation first off for anyone that thinks it's not worth attending consultation meetings or putting in a submission. This is evidence that is not true, and actually that people's views are taken and changes are made. Looking at the mixed use side of it, instinctively, I really like that idea as well, but not having the expertise in that, I just want to double check from your perspective if there's any risks in doing that or any unintended consequences, and what I kind of has made me think about that a little bit as I read through was Woodville in particular, and the challenge in Woodville in the commercial area as that town is projected to grow, of not having a whole lot of suitable commercial space. So that's why we had to look at the rec ground and look at that area. Is there an unintended consequence of having more mixed use that might mean that we have less commercial activity happening? And then that will impact like the compact urban form and those types of things. So just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
I'll give an answer first. I'm sure Dan can pitch in as well here. I think that's where we go to in terms of that idea of an overlay. So, we can pick Woodville in particular. We've also identified perhaps 3 blocks down the main street of Dannevirke, and maybe even the eastern side of Pahiatua with 3 or 4 blocks, and say, actually, this is retail and commercial space only. We don't want residential in these areas. So that's the sort of policy that we can bring in through the district plan. So there's discussion to have on that. So as part of that design guidelines work that we're doing, or design policy work we're now doing, that'll come into it. We're also looking at the urban upgrade strategies in terms of what we can actually do physically. So we'll tie that into there as well. Did you have any further?
Yeah, I guess probably the biggest bit of pushback we got was new industrial land, right across the board. That was probably the main objection, and it sort of got me thinking. Particularly, I wasn't at the Pahiatua night, but there was sort of a sense after that of, okay, well, we can't go here, so we've got to find somewhere else. And I think if we look across all the town centres, there's an oversupply of commercial land at the moment, and we're really going, how can we reinvigorate that? And certainly the key theme here is flexibility. And I don't think in terms of flexibility, we're not suggesting that things have to automatically get consent. We need to protect the permitted activity standards. But enable the flexibility for these businesses to occur. And basically what we can do is you could say, you can simply write a rule that says any premise that has a frontage to the main street of Dannevirke has to be retail or what have you. But then coming back from that, you can work out. And I think if you actually look at industrial growth in a realistic sense, we're not going to get large format industrial sporadically spread across the townships, other than the big open expanses that we've already got or the future one we're signalling. So it is your light to medium. It is the mechanic, the motorbike fixer, the welder fabricator, the small scale warehouse or what have you. And to have those, like if you I think Dannevirke's a prime example. You walk down the main street, there's a lot of buildings to the frontage. You literally come back 20 meters and it's massive open expanses of land. And just over and behind the gym there and stuff, there's car parks for Africa, and you could get a lot of those users into there and it brings more people to the town. So we don't need to push them out. So it's just about flexibility. We can have separate standards in the district plan around, okay, if you have these characteristics, then you need to do this, or if you have those, that sort of thing. So in terms of your question, I don't think there's any unintended consequences other than, as Shannon touched on, preventing that mechanic going in the middle of Dannevirke next to the pedestrian crossing across the road from the bank, because that's obviously not what you want to do. But, it is just about, I've said all along with this district plan, we have one of the most permissive at the moment. We need to retain that as much as we can to, still foster development moving forward.
We've got Councillor Peter, Wilson, then you, Steve. Councillor Peter.
Thanks, Chair Sharon. Thanks, guys, for this. I agree with Councillor Scott's comments on the mixed use side of things, and particularly with regard to Woodville. I think it's a great idea to have mixed use, but the main shopping block in Woodville has got one earthquake prone building in the middle that, if the owner of that felt that could be used for housing, it gets over his problems of having to strengthen the building, as I understand it. And it could be a big incentive for him to take away the shops and create a house there. That worries me, because that's right in the guts of the main shopping part of Woodville, that particular building. So I'm not quite sure how we get over that. I think you possibly answered it by saying, well, that area there is strictly commercial or whatever. But we need to be careful of those consequences, because they could easily happen.
Yeah, so in a planning sense, mixed use is never, ever about residential at ground floor road frontage. So every instance of mixed use, and there's plenty of instances of them occurring at the moment, it's always second story or to the rear as a secondary use. So you'd have your primary use, say if it was an industrial site, the primary use would be that industrial activity at the front, and then you could have a small residence, because some people like to own occupy because that's what's feasible for them. But it's never intended or allowed that you can have residential ground floor road frontage. Like, we just wouldn't get to a position of allowing that, and the rules would reflect that as well, and the consenting pathway. So, for example, if that particular person wanted to do just solely housing, they'd probably end up with a non-compliant activity, notified consent process, and a strong recommendation from council to decline the consent. So it's not about providing for that sort of thing at all.
Supplementary, thanks, Sharon. But I know of a place in Pahiatua that residential from front to back. I know of two in Woodville on the main street that are ostensibly shops or built as shops, but they are residential front to back currently. Whether they're complying with the rules or not, I'm not sure.
Well, as I said before, the existing district plan is literally the most permissive going around. It enables anything and everything. Zones almost other than highly productive land become irrelevant. Unfortunately, moving forward, the Resource Management Act allows for existing use rights, and they are existing lawfully established activities, so they can continue to operate for however long they wish to. and there is a case to be built to, you know, replace like for like. So if they wanted to upgrade the site for more residential, you're always going to get those small incidences of quirky things that are historic hangovers. That happens all the time of, you know, a commercial activity in the middle of a residential zone, a mechanic down a residential street. It's just those historic activities that have been there forever and a day. And I guess the benefit of them being there for forever and a day is that people are used to them being in those weird locations.
Thank you, Chair Sharon. Okay, so as the pioneer of an apartment in Pahiatua's Main Street, when we purchased that bank building way back in 1993, we always said if anything ever went wrong and we couldn't have a business in that, we would convert it, see if we could convert it to an apartment. The process was really quite simple because we just applied for a change of use and it came through the team here. It was granted within 15 working days, and so now we have a 300 square metre apartment in Pahiatua. We're landlocked at the back, so there was no ability to ever be able to go back any further. So that was the thing. But you mentioned before the shops on the eastern side of Pahiatua. There are quite a few in that block that are earthquake prone. What concerns me, I like the mixed use idea, and our situation is very different to Woodville because we've got a much more expansive, wide, you know, long main street. However, we do have a lot of empty buildings, and I think that's a sign of the times. You know, we did our environmental scan report last week and looking at the way internet shopping is taking away from retail, which is really tragic. But the horses bolted, and this all came about because of COVID. And I see bringing communities in, like what happened in Auckland, the CBD, it was empty. And everybody was told to stay home and work from home, and all those hospitality businesses suffered, as did we, and that's why we ended up closing our cafe in that building. And so then what happened was the office buildings where all the workers were suddenly got converted to apartments, and so you brought a sense of community back into the city. So there are ways of doing it, and I just think for Pahiatua particularly, the mixed use would be absolutely ideal. So yeah, thank you.
Councillor Steve, you had a question?
Yeah, mine reflects around weird locations, permitted active standard, and this is all to do with a concrete plant. So what we've got through historic, so that would be weird locations, we had a concrete plant in Queen Street, right? Which is right on where all the kids go to the South School, okay? But now it's walked into a metal pit because the corporate has closed down 3 other metal pits and stuck it in the middle of a town. And here's the twist, the dust, right? There's one guy sits on a loader all day, does not get out of that loader. And beside that, walked now into a metal pit concrete plant because under the Act, they are within their rights, okay? But here's the twist. One thing will happen for sure, a kid will get killed by a truck. Secondly, the neighbour next door, because by the way, I can speak from one kid come along there on a scooter because we own the property 2 down. And a kid went straight under our truck one day. He just, you know, his mother tried to save him and luckily he didn't die. So I'm talking from experience. So the neighbour next door put in a big faluting car painting firm and he had a new bake oven going. So he had to meet all the requirements. No pollution, no, because don't forget concrete's carcinogenic. So anyhow, so he went to all those hundreds of thousands of dollars to be compliant with the acts, which is compliance, nothing to do with this council. But here's the twist. He can't put any cars outside now because they all get covered in dust. Now, under the right, they say that their dust is not allowed to go across there. Well, that's like trying to contain sawdust. So, but where I'm trying to come from is the change. It's probably the weird location now and what it's walked into and the multiple use. So have we got any powers in this here of zoning? that we can, because they have come and met us and basically said, this is what we do.
That unfortunately comes back to, like I said before, around existing use rights. And the Resource Management Act, which is now staying as it is, explicitly provides for things to continue as of right, as long as they were originally lawfully established. It does get a little bit grey when activities morph over time and they started here and then they end up being something completely different. So there is an element of compliance and check to look at that history to make sure what was originally lawfully established is still the case, and they haven't triggered a consent along that journey of morphing into something else. Essentially, through our new work, we can't make any changes to that. So if we come in and roll out a new zone or a new rule structure or anything like that, that is from that day moving forward for any changes. We can't retrospectively enforce those on those activities moving backwards. So the crucial thing is lawful establishment and then still continuing. But if we came in and said, okay, as of tomorrow moving forward, concrete plants are prohibited in this location, that wouldn't mean that existing one would have to stop. It can continue under existing use rights.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, that's the problem. It's gone from a concrete plant to a metal plant, two totally different things. And that's where, let alone, and we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in fixing our three waters. Well, if you look at the gutter from the plant down, it's full of concrete. If you look at the gutter from the plant up, it's clean. So there's a whole lot of, which I cannot believe we're just letting go. But so it is very frustrating to think the cost going forward is going to be probably a death of a kid. And I'm very passionate about that. But anyhow, so thank you for the weird location. So we haven't got anything under what you actually said, permitted active standards. Permitted, you said that phrase.
Yeah, so permitted, that's the rule structure in the district plan. So permitted activity standards are what allows people to do on their site as of right without having to come to council for a consent. We need, to put my comment into context, we want to protect that as much as possible where activities are located where we want them to locate. So if you want to build a house on a residential site, permitted activity, we don't want to trigger consents. If you want to put a retail activity on the main street of Danny Burke, Paeatua or Woodville, we don't want to automatically make you get a consent because it's just increasing the burdens and the loop, the barriers to entry for those activities. But if you want to go and put a industrial activity in the residential zone, no, we don't want that to be permitted. We want to push back against that in our planning documents. So I think just to close out your loop, maybe have a conversation with us separately outside of this work about that site, and we can certainly look at it around its consenting history to see if it has morphed to something that triggers the need, but that's probably more of a compliance thing rather than our future planning.
I'm gonna go to you, Amy.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, Councillor Wallace, that site's actually in the industrial management area, so it is an industrial use. So that's feeding onto that permitted activity standards. That industrial activity is anticipated within an industrial management area.
So we haven't got anything sustainable.
Not really. Well, in that sense, the activity is suited to the location. However, you cannot have objection or dust beyond the boundary, and that becomes a regional council matter. So I can catch up with you later.
Take it offline. Yeah. You spot?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to keep us moving, Shannon,
Yeah.
please?
Okay, well, I think, yeah, so that's good. We've covered the mixed use. It seems we're pretty happy with that, which is great. Excuse me. We did make a little change just in terms of land use classifications. The National Party is really quite clear that they will remove the restrictions on land use category 3, which means that sites open up a lot more easier. So we've just made some changes in that regard.
Hold on, Shannon, I have a question from.
Shannon, through you, Chair. Shannon, any idea of the timeline for that? When is that going to occur?
Yeah, who knows, really? Minister Bishop did indicate in a speech to the planning conference, you were there actually, possibly May, June. But I think they're getting a bit of a beating with their fast track approvals bill. So yeah, things may change. Yeah, just some changes obviously about the Water Services Act. So we've just had to catch up with those. Just going through some stuff we've sort of covered already. Yeah, so we had a submission from Fonterra. Excuse me. They were very keen for their site out of Paetua to be zoned industrial. And in light of the discussions that we had with the residents next to the existing industrial area in Paetua who were adamantly opposed to that expanding. And we also heard that there's a marae operating there on freehold land, not Māori land, so which we hadn't been aware of. So it was clear that we should not move forward with industrial where we were proposing it within town and to grow that industrial area. So we were then sort of scratching our heads of where do we put industrial land in Paetua, because nobody else wants it either, except for Fonterra said, yes, we'd very much have it. Thank you very much. Now, obviously, really that we've only covered their property, but when you look quite closely at their property, they have got a lot of land around it. The actual plant is quite small and there's quite a lot of space around the outside. So, I mean, it becomes their commercial decision to whether, that could grow, but potentially I think, there is scope for Fonterra to perhaps subdivide or allow additional industrial activity to happen if we move forward with that. Rural.
The outcome.
We had a reference in the couple of references leaning towards Papakāinga and developing a set of guidelines for Papakāinga development. And we had already started on a road of sort of looking at that. There's actually quite a number of really good guidelines out there that have been put together with iwi. Hastings Council's got a really good set that we were sort of starting to lean on, and we're going to talk to iwi about that. But again, consistent with the idea of actually bringing all of that stuff into the district plan. We're now not going to do a set of Papakāinga guidelines, but again, we'll embed it in policy in the district plan. So that's something to continue working through with iwi on. There was quite a lot of discussion from landowners, particularly up in Dannevirke up on the hill here, about the suitability of their land for residential development, given the streams and the low-lying areas that go through it. And I think they're valid concerns. They said that it's a very wet area, etc. I don't think we had a look. We don't think it's as wet as they were necessarily making out, and there is actually quite a lot of space in there. And certainly there are some streams and there are some waterways. From my perspective, I actually think they're a real opportunity for a residential area. That actually at the moment it's rural residential or even sort of rural uses on there. It's all zoned rural, and so whether we like it or not, a lot of those waterways up through there are being grazed right the way through them. They're quite modified. Very few have really sort of taken any great care of them. So through residential development, I think there's a real opportunity for a developer, and again through the policy that we write, to actually do something really good with those waterways, to have setbacks, to create recreational corridors and those sorts of things. So we're still pretty confident that there's enough room up through the residential area that we've put in the zoning. However, based on the comments and based on wanting to set those setbacks, we've actually just expanded the residential area up in the top of Dannevirke here to allow for that extra space. And it'll have to be something that future developers will have to consider when they go through how they actually manage development around those waterways. There was a bit of opposition to the wording that we'd used in the document about the Woodville Racecourse. It was, I can't remember the name of the woman who came to talk to me. She was on the board, and she was pretty grumpy that we had suggested that the racecourse was a great site for doing something with in the future, because she said that they were adamant to stay, which is contrary to some other comments that we've had, which is they don't really know what they're doing, and some future options would be really good for them. In the end, we chose just again pretty much stay silent. We haven't zoned the racecourse. We have talked about it, and we've left it in the document as a potential opportunity, subject to the landowner wanting to do something. And we've just left it at that at this stage. My personal view, I think we share it, is yeah, they won't be lasting there for much longer, and it does present a really interesting opportunity for something probably residential in the future, maybe even a older care home or something, retirement village or something like that could be. I don't know, something like that, but we'll have to leave that to them to come back.
Yes.
Comment on that, Shannon. As a member of the racing club, I received an email along with all other members, something along or to the effect of they've got 2 years of racing left. Now, the world does change, as we've noticed over the last 6 months. That could well change, but the way that racing in New Zealand's going, I think it will continue on the path that it's on at the moment, and it's probably likely that they'll only have a couple of years, maybe 3. Well, that's not long, really. So I accept what you say, and I agree with what you say about, well, let's just leave it off the map at the moment, but in the back of our minds, we know it's there. And when it comes to possibly closing the rugby ground in Woodville and creating a supermarket or whatever, we'd need to have a sports ground somewhere else. There's an existing beautiful stand up there, not the new one, the old one, that would sit nicely alongside a new sports ground up there. But that's just something to keep in the back of our minds, I think.
I guess want to make a bit of a comment in this space is that, consultation, the whole point of consultation is going out and getting the community view. And for the most part, we try to take as much of that into account as we can. And I think we've demonstrated, and I think Councillor Scott touched on it before, like we have listened in a lot of instances. But at the same time, the bigger picture sometimes needs to prevail. And as I've said all along, it's really crucial for this document to be aspirational. And we've got to remember it's a 30-year timeline. And a lot can happen over that 30 years, but we need to start, I guess, lay some building blocks now. And, the pipe dream, I suppose, of relocating the sports fields and that being a crucial site for Woodville, and then the opportunity there is a long-term aspiration, but we need to lay some building blocks for that now so that can be built on in the future. And hey, if the strategy got reviewed in 3 years' time and there was change in that space, then certainly I think to put it into context, there's always going to be instances where change is not accepted by some landowners. And I think if we were to take an approach of shying away from everything where there was resistance, we probably wouldn't do anything. And I don't mean that to disrespect, because I'm a landowner myself, and if somebody was to put something over top of me, I would have apprehensions to that as well. But like I say, sometimes that bigger picture does need to prevail, and things do change and times are changing and things need to grow, and we've just got to balance that out. So I 100% understand where the race course is probably coming from, because it's their livelihood and it's their, they don't want to let go of that. But I think in terms of a 30-year timeline, it may not be till year 20 that something happens there. And if we're realistic as we transition from this document into the district plan review, we're not going to rezone every single piece of land that's in the strategy, because district plans are 10 years, growth strategies are 30, but we do need to, as I say, lay those building blocks now for future decisions.
We had quite a lot of discussion about the industrial hub concept at Woodville that we had been putting at the base of the new road. We had a discussion with the landowner who shared with us some confidential information about what they're looking to do with their piece of land, and an industrial site or industrial zoning did not fit with what their plans were. So they requested that it doesn't get rezoned, or not all of it. So what we have done is we've reduced the area. We looked at a couple of other sites, and I know Councillor Peter went and talked to a couple of people about some opportunities as well. What we've done is we've put in an area which we've marked on the growth strategy, which is on the original piece of land. It's a bit smaller, and it sets up what Dan was just saying about an aspiration. So look, we want something there, but then what we've put into a commentary is it's to be confirmed exactly where that is, and the plan is to run that through the district plan process. It might not land exactly where we've mapped it in the growth strategy. It might land in an area near that, or be shaped in a slightly different way. And the best way to do that is actually when you actually come to rezone it through the district plan. And it might not happen in this district plan, it might be the next one. But that's the conversation to have. So we haven't shelved it. We've highlighted it, we want it. We just haven't resolved exactly what it is or where it is. That's to come.
I ask what those balloons were.
What was that?
Thanks, Chair Sharon, and thanks for that. I don't dislike the wording that you've put around that, and I think the district plan process may be a good one for people to I guess work through that process a bit more. But I just wonder if if there is any ability for us before we jump into that process to have that tightened up a little bit more. So I absolutely take on board if there's some confidential information in different land use that could make the area not suitable. We've highlighted that where we want it, or we're starting to have conversations with people about alternative locations. So I know we have a timeline for sure. But is there any other work that can be done to try and firm that process up, or that concept up, before we get into the district plan process? Because a lot of the district plan process is going to be informed from this document. So I suppose I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I'm trying to go, is there any way that we can make sure we leave no stone unturned?
I guess the first response is that the two don't have to be exact, in the sense that what's exactly in this document isn't exactly what gets rezoned. It's a strategy, it's aspirational, it's direction setting. So I think how we've approached and how Shannon's written the document to send a signal in the terms of the direction does not hamstring us in any way, shape or form in terms of future decisions. I guess the other part of it too is that this is a council document that's kind of just done in this room, versus a district planning document that has high levels of burden of proof against a statutory piece of legislation. So, you know, I'll be open and honest and say that we're going to have some hurdles to get through in a district plan process around the justification for zoning and, you know, the elephant in the room, servicing those zones. So I think for where we are, the growth strategy does what it needs to do in terms of setting our direction. I think it's as tight as it needs to be. It's now to, you know, get this in place so we can move into that more prescriptive process and work through those things, as you know, to make those changes moving forward.
I can see, Shannon, from the way you're moving we want to get into that. So how are you going to handle this part, Shannon? Are you going to put the maps up, or are you going to take us through the text of the submission, and then perhaps?
Is there a preference?
What would work for everyone? They want to see when you've been sent you've all received the attachment, as it were, Happening. Oh, sorry. Yeah, is that better? What would work easier? Because I think there is value in making sure that all of us around the table have a sense of in each of those areas. You've given us the text, but to actually see it on a map and perhaps ask specific questions.
I keep cutting off. Leah, well, let's jump straight to the maps. That's probably the easier thing.
Township by township, list them all as we change.
Yeah.
We do have your text to refer to anyway. Everyone comfortable with that approach?
One of the big changes that we made to the maps since the last one was how the tables read. And so and this was largely came about because we've now got this mixed use concept. So we've set up in the document how much commercial and how much industrial land we need, but now we're saying we're going to do it as mixed use. And I had this sort of dilemma. Does that mean we go back to the document and change all of our references to how much industrial and how much commercial land we need and change it to just this how much mixed use? And I decided that actually, no, that wasn't the right approach. We still need to understand the specific activities and how much land we need. We're just providing for it as a mixed use. But when it came to the tables that I've got displayed here, it wasn't clear how much land we already had in this commercial and then how much that was changing to mixed use. So what we've done now is put all of the categories down, how much is existing in each town. So obviously we don't have rural residential, we don't have mixed use in Dannevirke at the moment. What's our aspirational goal for the area, the amount that we want to grow by? And so I left that as 0 because that's come from the tables within the document. So therefore, what's our total required? But then what I've then gone to is, so how much new area is mapped? And then what's the total area now that's been mapped? So you can see at that point that the total required for mixed use was 0, but actually what we've done is mapped 25.7 hectares, and then the commercial and industrial is mapped at 0. So you can now sort of understand how that has changed and how it's all gone, and then what our total mapped area is for zoning for each type of zone. So as I mentioned, I don't know how well you can see my mouse, but yeah, up in the top here, originally we only had the 3 blocks that were residential. This is what I was mentioning before. We've added the 4th one in there as to allow for the waterways and sort of lower lying areas. That gives more space to residential. It doesn't mean that the density of the built areas is any greater or less. They can still be quite tight, residential. It just means that where there's a stream, there's a gap, and there's a space around that stream, which can be used, as I say, as a recreational corridor or something like that. The impact of that was a slightly reduced rural residential area because that area there was rural residential, but there's still plenty of rural residential. And of course, there's plenty more existing beyond that, but we're just not going to rezone that. We're not recommending to. As I mentioned, we took away the industrial area at the to the south, which means that we didn't actually add any industrial area into Dannevirke at all. Rather, when we really started looking at it, and I went back and forth through the industrial zone quite a few times, there is actually quite a lot of capacity in there. So market value will change that organically. As people say, well, actually, I really need an industrial site. I'll either go and try and get a consent for a non-industrial area, or I'll just pay a little bit more and I'll squeeze my industrial area into an existing area. So either one of those pathways remains open. So yeah, we think there's actually plenty of space in there through to do quite a lot of growth. And then as mentioned, in through the middle, you'll see that that whole zone is now mixed use. What we haven't shown is that idea of an overlay that might say this little particular area, these 3 blocks might be more retail focused or something. That will come in the next document that we'll go down to a more detailed level of development policy. I think they're the main changes in Dannyburg.
Councillor Keary, you've had that look in your eye and then.
Oh,
You're
pretty
good.
happy with that, too. Yeah, I think, sorry.
Yeah, the industrial area to the south we got a bit scrappy in the old library that night, but I think we do have an area that's sitting there anyway that sits in rural land that we changed a few decades ago. But I think the little strip along between the end of town and that area caused quite a bit of debate amongst a few, but I'm pretty happy with that actually.
Comments from anyone around the Dannyburg one? Councillor Ellison, you're pointing.
Just one big picture where I'm standing in the street.
Good so far? No, sorry, Councillor Steve.
I'm just saying you can see my problem there with a little bit of pink in the middle of everything else right there. That's my problem. That's going to be my legacy.
Just a comment, Councillor Chair, Madam Chair. There is a looming issue down the Miller Street there, which isn't zoned industrial too, and it's just interesting. All of a sudden, the actual use of the land starts to change, and there's quite a bit of residential down there, but there's quite a bit of discussion with some of those councils about the change of actual use, which probably the only really controls then is the controls about the use, regulatory and stuff like that. But the world catches up sometimes, doesn't it? Where the land gets used and people have not had it used for decades. What it is, isn't it? Anyway, I'm happy. Dannyburg's fine with me.
I just have one question around Dannyburg, and I think I asked that question, Shannon and Amy and Dan at our little meeting. There was quite a bit of feedback around the different ends of Tennyson Street. So has that been resolved in this? Some were industrial and some were residential, and they're all getting a bit pippy as to.
I honestly think, sorry, Shannon, a lot of these types of discussions I think are better suited for the district plan review, because this is just a direction setting document. We're getting into quite a lot of specific site detail. I think once we get into that district plan review and we start consolidating actual zonings and locations of things, we can start to tidy those things up. They don't need to be in here per se. As I say, this is just more about that, hey, 30 years, general direction we want to go in this location. Those specific like Tennyson Street or even the industrial, we can have a conversation about that through the plan review if we need to make specific change or implement specific regulatory functions in those locations to, manipulate or push things where we want them to go.
Everyone happy we move on from Dannyburg? We'll just skip the next map, will we, Shannon?
My life too much. Dan and I just had a very quick discussion amongst here, and we'll have to just do a bit more thinking. But one potential option is that little industrial area in the middle there. We could actually change that to mixed use. It wouldn't deal with the current problem because they would have an existing use right under what Dan was talking about earlier, but it could benefit going forward. So if that's of interest, that's a change we could make.
Yes, please.
Feedback. Yeah, makes sense. Any other comments? Here we go. Look out. Go for it, Councillor Scott.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. It's a relatively minor to some, but a major, I think, to others. And I thought we would have probably got a bit more feedback on the aspirational decision to rezone the recreation ground and where the pool is. Although when I've had discussions with people about that on a one-on-one, they understand the aspiration. But one thing that did come up, and it might be helpful in this document where it says relocate sports ground, to add in relocate sports ground and pool. So just adding in those words just to make it clear, because in some people's minds, the way that it was worded was that the pool would not be relocated, only the sports ground. So I know that was never our intent with it, but it's just a minor request to add a reference to the pool as well. It's okay.
I guess my feeling is that I mean, the pool could stay there. I mean, if
Pool's been rezoned as well as part of that drive-in.
that could be left out, just take that little corner out.
I personally, again, just to go back to my comments about direction setting, I think if we go back to that map, you could easily change, and Shannon talked about it, maybe it just hasn't pulled back through, but for that site and the racecourse site, we could simply just put asterisks over top of them and refer to them as future opportunity sites. And that way it signals that there is an opportunity there in the future. What that may be is broad enough that it's there. We're not getting into specifics about relocate, because I can understand that, but I think that's the solution. We just put an asterisk on both those two sites. It doesn't mean any change for the race course. It doesn't mean any immediate change for the thing, but it does start, like I said before, lay those building blocks to there's future opportunities here.
That's a good question.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And I think that's a really good solution. So thank you, Dan. And I think it's sometimes people like to read into these things that are not there and not the intent. So I think that absolutely covers the way that I've definitely been talking about it with people. So thank you.
We finished with Woodville. Not quite.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably have covered it. We have left the industrial area down through here. I spoke to the landowner on this site on the phone, and he didn't quite understand what it meant until I started explaining it to him, and he went, "Oh, so I could do such," and I said, "Yeah, you would be able to." "Oh, excellent, bring it on." So yeah, he was pretty happy. We spoke to a couple of the tenants down next to the railway lines here. I think there's a cabinet maker and various things sort of down there. We had zoned them as industrial, and he was a bit sort of, it's not really what we want. You know, could we have a shop out of there? And I said, not really under industrial. So we made the call with him at the time to say, well, let's call it mixed use. And he thought that was fantastic. He was really on board with that. And then, as I said, there's the opportunity there, which is much reduced because the landowner didn't want it across these sites, so it stays here. There remains a property. Is it just in there? I think, isn't it? We had a submission from the woman who owns the property there, who's pretty opposed to the whole idea of industrial in this area, which I totally understand why. But from a bigger, town perspective, that's the direction we want to take in terms of that area. So, yeah, it's sad for her, unfortunately, but that's sort of setting a future direction that'll come out through the district plan.
Yeah.
And across the road, across on the other side of Woodlands Road from that industrial site we've got there, Dan commented about expanding it over to there as well.
Yes, so we looked at that, and I think, going back to my comment before, we could have drawn that, we could have drawn down here and across through here. What we've done is said, look, here's one parcel or two. Let's plonk it there for now. Let's come back to it through the district plan process. I think what we definitely need to do is understand the flood modelling data through there in a lot more detail before we go too much further. So yeah, I think there's enough of an indication that we want something there, is our feeling.
Fourth Woodville?
So Paeatua, the biggest change here really was the removal of the industrial, which was down through the bottom through here. We've changed that into a little bit of residential growth, which was what was desired, and then also rural residential coming down through here. So I think we've made some very happy people down there. And then this is the Fonterra site, so that's the change over there. I did look at the farm opposite, this one in through here, as a possibility, but it's actually pretty difficult land. It's quite undulating. Obviously there's a stream that runs through there as well, so it didn't really suit an industrial type activity unless we're involved with tons of earthworks. So we've left that out for now. I mean, that again could come through. We've signalled this is where the industrial area for Paeatua is going to be. If there's a chance to grow it, then there'll be mechanisms in the district plan review to be able to look at that.
You've made
This
some
is a good
very
sign
happy
that you're
earlier, right?
Yeah.
Ikitauhuna, just looking at that, that's not Ikitauhuna, that's Norsewood. So there's Ikitauhuna, thank you. It's on the next page. I'm used to seeing this printed on two sides. So mixed use through the centre of town, no change there. No change to the residential areas. We picked up a mistake that we had actually rezoned this little area in the middle previously, but it hadn't come through onto the maps on the document that was actually released for some bizarre reason. So anyway, we've fixed that problem now. So that's showing. It's not really a change. It's just it was always there. It just didn't show. And then we just added this little area, which is by the school down there. We had a submission from a landowner there who said that she was looking to do a subdivision that was advanced in her view, and this would help her. Now, we didn't see any reason why you wouldn't do it, a residential development in through there. So this is just about making it a bit easier for somebody with no real consequences. It's back one, isn't it? Yeah.
What might be my eyes here, but what's the dark grey on your legend?
The dark grey is the proposed residential, which is not up on that legend. So well spotted. Yeah, we'll fix that. It's dropped off the legend. So that's good.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Madam Chair, just also when you're updating the legend, if you pop in the rural residential as well, I think that's dropped off the legend.
It is. Joys of GIS.
Any questions around Ikitauhuna before we move to Norsewood? Good. Okay, let's go back to Norsewood.
Norsewood, not really any changes here from the previous, apart from we had this little block in here, we had put as mixed use. And the landowner rang me and said, why have you done that? It contains a goat, some long grass and a septic tank. There's absolutely no point putting it in mixed use. Thank you. Just it's best just left as it is. So that's what we've done. So the goat can stay. Fair enough.
Can you?
Councillor Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Sharon. Just up from there, Shannon, see on the corner, you got the mixed uses, that's there, yeah, that's Norsewood, correct?
Yes.
Well, across the road, right, there, there's a there's a recording studio and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we actually did talk about that.
So I just wonder, are you going to change it? Thank you.
Back to you.
Thanks, Sharon. Back, if you flick back to the Woodville map, please, Sharon.
I forgot you're gonna ask that.
The other way, the other.
There we go. Yeah. No, that's fine. Now, just looking to see whether the corner of Vogel Street, Nelson Street, Grant Street, that's at the northeast corner of the main road there, is now residential. It wasn't on the last map. Yep, no, thanks.
No other comments on those maps?
That's where we're moving from now, aren't we? Yeah, I knew Kerry would have one.
No, I think the residential legend may be missing one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has. They're all linked. So, yeah. So we'll just need to, there's some weird things happened when I've done it. Yeah. It's all automatically generated, apparently, but.
Okay, I agree.
No other questions from the maps then? Fantastic. Okay, Shannon.
Well, so it's a couple of small changes to be made there, but essentially that is sort of sums it up. I think we're there. So what we can do now is make those changes, and the plan is to then your next full council meeting, you then adopt this report. So it becomes live. So there's, I think, probably just a couple of things for us to do before you do that. We would like to go back to the submitters and say thank you, and this is what we've done and agreed, so that they are aware of it. We also have made some changes to land that wasn't previously captured, so the submitter wouldn't, the landowner wouldn't have known. So there's only a couple of instances where that's happened. So, for example, in Dannyburg. So what we think we probably need to do is actually go and just make a phone call to those people and say, look, this is what we've done. And we know they'll be comfortable with it, but just to be sure that they're covered in the loop. And then, of course, we need to speak to Ngāti Kahungunu and Rangitane. So we'll try and do that in the next few weeks. Although the guidance from them is that they're actually pretty comfortable with this document, and what their real focus is on is what next. So I don't see any problems with them being happy with this.
So you would aim to complete that process, especially getting back to the submitters before the final copy comes to council. So there'll be no surprises for anyone. Fantastic. Any other comments? Councillor Kerry.
Well, just a minor thing, Madam Chair, just reading through the report and that, I just saw, I thought, a couple of grammatical and a couple of little points. I'd made a note somewhere which I didn't bring one back, but if do you want any notes from us about those, or is that?
Yep, please send them. We've had so many people read it and go through it. It's unbelievable. So yeah, if you spotted more, then let us know. We'll change them.
Oh, critical.
Just lastly, just want to reiterate, there is still 2 more bites at the cherry for the public and before any changes actually hit the ground. So just to reiterate that when we go through a draft district plan and then a formal district plan, so there's plenty of opportunity there for land notice once we actually have specific changes. Just to build off what Shannon just said, we have had numerous meetings with Kahungunu and Rangitane, so there's nothing in here that's a surprise. But yeah, they are very interested in actually what is given effect to in the district plan. But then I just wanted to make a quick comment before you wrap up, Chair Sharon. I just wanted to commend and thank on behalf of the team, the councillors, for their attendance at the sessions, because it really does break down a barrier for us as technical experts sort of getting hammered. And I think Councillor Steve over here might recall he swung into my rescue at the Dannyburg drop-in centre when I was getting accosted by some locals. But it is really awesome to to have your attendance at those sessions, because it makes a huge difference, because it does break down those barriers between technical and the public. So thank you. And yeah, as again, I wasn't at the Paetua one, but Councillor Scott, sounds like you were really influential in that as well. So it goes a really long way to helping our process. And I think in all my time of working on policy projects and that sort of thing, having the level of buy-in and engagement from this table in this room has been really positive and helped us a lot. And we'll continue to do that as we move forward. So thank you, everybody.
Pleasure.
Any closing comments from anyone? Before I do bring this particular report to a close. Councillor Steve.
Yeah, I just got to say, it's a pleasure to work with these guys. They did well, our team along that day. So yeah, pleasure to be behind your back, mate.
Shannon?
Yeah, well, yeah, so thank you. I mean, that closes out growth strategy. Just a couple of things we just wanted to touch base very quickly, which is what happens now after this document. So we've talked about the development policy document that we're preparing. I actually have a draft of it in my bag at the moment, which my team's put together, of trying to get through and have a read of it. The idea is to try and get that draft to Dan by the end of the month, which is today, tomorrow. So we're close to that, you know, in a few days. And then once we have that, we'll work it up. So expect to see that coming through in a few weeks or a month or so, of what sort of that looks like in terms of shaping up development policy. The other piece of work that we have started working on is looking at the urban upgrades. And so that's sort of more the physical. What are we actually going to do in town to improve and, you know, enhance, make these places that people want to be, want to come to. So it sort of sits on the back of this growth and says, listen, we've got this aspirational growth. How do we actually go and get it? We gave that quite a lot of thought about how best to do that. We decided we didn't want to write another big document because the community's seen enough big documents. So we're actually doing these as very large posters. So there'll be probably 2 or 3 posters for each town, and then maybe one for the smaller villages, which will look at an analysis of the town first. So things like transport, parking, earthquake-prone buildings, heritage buildings, activity uses, you know, what's going on in them right now, what are the materials, what is the architecture like. So there's one poster that sort of captures all of that for each town centre. Then there'll be another one which is identifying some opportunities that we see as sort of expert people looking at this sort of thing. So we'll do that for the 3 towns here and Woodville and Paetua. Through that process of identifying and talking about those opportunities, we'll also speak to the infrastructure team here at council to sort of bring them in. Probably end up talking to NZTA. Obviously, they're a big stakeholder player in how all of these towns work. We're then proposing to have some further community consultation sessions specifically on those at the end of May. What we're looking at is more of a drop-in afternoon. So we would have the posters up maybe a week beforehand around the place. The community can come. Anybody would be invited to turn up whenever they want. Would start probably at 3 or 4 in the afternoon and run through to 8 o'clock so that it covers plenty of time. We haven't worked out all of those details and we haven't worked out the dates yet, but that's sort of what we're starting to look at. And it really would be just come in, have a conversation. We're looking at probably doing it as a post-it note type exercise. So everybody can write a post-it note, just whack it on a poster and say, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do that. They can leave comment if they want to, leave phone numbers. And so we'll build up from there. Following that, then we'll lead into what their recommendations are. The important thing about that is this is not necessarily recommendations just for council to deliver. It's for the council and community to deliver. If you look at places like Greytown, Arrowtown, Matakana, yes, council's done a lot in those places, but actually it's been community driven. This has to be the same. This has to be something that communities want. So those are the sorts of ideas we're trying to draw out. So yeah, so expect to see that sort of growing. And then a third piece of work that we're just looking at is sort of transportation strategy for each of the towns. And what we're really meaning is, how does the roads work and function? How do we manage the growth? And not just roads for vehicles, like motorised vehicles, but also for walking and for cycling and for the buzzword is micro mobility, scooters, rollerblades, whatever it is that, hoverboards, whatever they're going to be. So how do we make those work with the town? And I think that's an important piece of work, because it's about car parking, and it's about safe crossings, those sorts of things. So that's the work that's now we're rolling into over the next few months.
Thanks very much, Chair Sharon. Thanks for that update. I've got a couple of quick questions, if that's okay. You mentioned running through that exercise with 3 towns. E Kirahuna has always kind of been a part of sort of upgrade processes and other things. They also have quite active committees that do look at getting external fundraising. So just wondering if
It is. Yes. We're going to have, it's managing the amount of work, really. So we'll have probably 3 posters for each for Danny Verk, Woodville and Pahitua, which cover, one will be an analysis, one will be opportunities, one will be recommendations. And then we'll probably just have one thing that captures all of it for E Kirahuna, one for Norsewood. And yeah, so those will. So we'll go through the same process. We'll probably have sessions with them, but yeah, no, we're covering that.
Thanks very much for that.
captured. One thing as well, just on the last bit you were talking about. I would caution spending too much time looking at cycle stuff, and the only reason why I say that is there's very little that we can do on our own, and it seems that it's going to be very hard to get external funding. So I just would make that comment from all the indications that we're hearing at the moment.
I guess my only response to that would be e-bikes are changing the world and changing how people think about getting around quite dramatically. So yeah, I would agree with you. If e-bikes weren't here, I'd probably agree, but they're getting more and more accessible. So they're becoming motorised vehicles.
Any other comments before I close with the recommendation? All good? Okay, so the recommendation under item number 7.1 is that we receive consultation feedback and documentation amendments, but more importantly that under 1.2 that we agree to the changes made and have been detailed this morning arising from the submissions received on the consultation. So could I please have a mover? Councillor Ellison, did you get that? All those in favour? Well done. Thank you, Shannon, Dan and Amy. You're well aware I will close off with some comments, some of which have been reflected already by my fellow councillors. This has been one of the most positive, satisfying processes that I've been involved in the last 5 years sitting around this council table. So it's a huge thank you from all of us here to all 3 of you. I know there's lots of behind the scenes stuff goes on, but to be honest, the 3 of you have made this one of the most simplest, straightforward, clear processes that that all of us have got in behind and got excited about. So I am looking forward to even working more into the future with the 3 of you. But thank you for taking us under your wings and guiding us along and putting up with some of the the little idiosyncrasies that a number of us carry on our shoulders. It has been, no, I'm not looking at you. I'm still, I still harbour some views that I won't say because we're being recorded. So, but no, a genuine huge thank you. We welcome you back through the doors for the next stages in the process. So it is with much pleasure that I thank you for attending today in person,
Shirts too.
in shirts.
Close.
No, we're not going there. That'll be a council meeting, that one. Yeah. So a sincere thank you to all three of you for taking us on this journey. And we look forward to the final document being accepted through the formal process at our council meeting. So well done, guys. So before I bring the full committee meeting to a close, as I do, are there any other issues that anyone wishes to? Mayor Tracy.
Thanks, Chair Sharon. Just with the government's announcement of the earthquake prone buildings, I think it'd be quite good if we can, whether as a committee or whether it's a subcommittee, get together and just formulate some of our thinking around what we might submit to any future reviews, so that we've got that direction. I think that's the only way we're going to get ahead of the game. So if I could just signal that to yourself and the Chief Executive.
Get that email from
Michael Ford.
And I had yeah, and I think that's the direction I'm looking forward. If we can have some consensus, and I think Councillor Sutherland would agree, from yesterday, it's around providing simple solutions that are realistic and timely. So if we can be part of that solution focus for the government in that review, we'll get more of what our community wants and needs.
Yes. Yes. So as I bring this committee meeting to a close, thank you everyone for your attendance. We'll see you again in 2 months' time. I'll just close this with a short karakia. Kia tautua rangamārie, ki runga e ngā iwi e te ao. Let your peace reign on all the people of the world. Amen. Thanks, everyone.